Right.
All right. It's a friend conversation between me and Anita. We're going to talk about her idea that's turning into our idea of Attunement Bootcamp, which is something like how do you practice attunement and emotional work in coaching as hard as athletes practice their sports and as intentionally um, and with rapid feedback. Um, and we're going to start just doing a view check-in with each other. Um, because on these friend conversations, we're vulnerable and we keep it real. Um, and for the rest of this, I hope to mostly, let's say like 80% ignore the fact that we have an audience.
Mm. We're
And
just jamming.
just jamming with my friends. Um, and Anita, how are you doing?
Just pouring some green tea. Feeling grateful to my parents for bringing this from Japan.
Mm,
Um, I'm very excited about this. Okay, this whole week I've just been having like excitable energy running through my body, and it's like, oh my God, so intense. I don't know how to like contain it, or contain is not the right word, but it feels bigger than me. Uh, so yeah, I'm feeling that. And like openness or expansiveness around what might emerge.
sweet.
How about you?
And follow-up question first. What are you avoiding?
I'm avoiding fear of losing what I have because, like, right now I have the freedom that I was wanting for so long, and I have it, and it's like better than I even imagined.
Mm,
Um, and I'm also really excited because I feel like the work that I'm doing is so exciting, and the stuff I'm learning is just like deepening in a way that, again, is beyond my expectations. And I guess there's fear about losing that, or that somehow going away.
mm. It's just like a general feeling of freedom in your work or in general.
I feel really time rich, which is what I wanted. I wanted to be time rich.
Mm.
And I feel so time rich, and it's so good. I love it. It's what I wanted for so long, when I was like imagining when I was working full time and I was like unhappy. And anytime the question came around like what is the source of the thing that was making me unhappy, and there was obviously a number of things, but the thing that I most was unhappy about was somebody else being in charge of my time.
Mm.
And now I'm in charge of my time finally, and I have been for a few years now, a couple of years now. So yeah.
Mm. Sweet.
And you, what's your checking?
I'm I'm nervous and I'm excited. I'm nervous. I'm scared of getting an anxious loop about like I just put a giant sticky note over my self view because I don't like looking at myself. And like I just like a lot of tiny things like my bed is fake made. It's like not actually made at the bottom. I'm wearing pajama pants. I didn't shower this morning. Like um I'm revealing all the ways I'm an imposter, so no one can point out that I'm an imposter. So that makes me
Great.
nervous, but also revealing it feels good because then it's just like I don't need to hide it. Yeah, it feels good. Um, and I'm like, the fucking goal is jamming with my friends, so that's what we're fucking here to do. Yeah, I'm I'm nervous about my nervousness, but I'm also excited.
Nice. I have a question for you now.
Go for it.
What's what's hiding behind the post-it note?
Huh. Uh, I'd say like self-consciousness and the possibility of crying. Uh, Maybe grief. Grief is interesting. Maybe grief.
I welcome your grief and your self-consciousness.
Thank you. Maybe it'll come up more. Anything else before we get into it?
You know what I was just thinking? It would be so funny if like once that shifts for you, the post-it note just falls off. You know how sometimes the glue comes off
Mm,
on its own?
mm.
It would be like in the movies where it just comes down at the right time.
It's a digital post-it note, so that would be very creepy,
Oh, okay.
but
I was
still theoretically
imagining a real
possible.
one. Maybe there's like a Mac bug that might show itself.
I hope not. Um, all right. First thing.
Sorry,
Hmm.
I am very excitable, so I'm gonna be laughing a lot.
No worries, not a problem. When do you when did you first come up with Attunement Bootcamp, and do you remember that?
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago. I think I was sat here at my desk.
But you also said it was a baby in you for years.
Oh no, I didn't say yes. I said weeks.
Oh, weeks. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had been thinking about, so something I had been thinking about is like, okay, what are the skills of coaching? Because anything I do, I like to break it down and be like, okay, like what are the key things? So I have been thinking a lot about like, okay, it's attunement, and like right now, I think it's attunement and unconditional love. But the idea to actually do something with like to train for attunement came a few weeks ago. And I don't remember the details, but suddenly I was just sat here. I was like, Attunement Bootcamp. We're gonna actually train for it rather than um hope for it to develop. I think before it was like, oh, it will develop over time by just coaching. And then suddenly I was like, oh, what would it be like to actually run experiments and train more actively rather than hope that it will come about as a side effect, which I think both will happen, but I also wanted to see what it would be like to train for it. But
Hmm.
not in a serious way of like type A kind of like um we are going to master, like not in that way, but just more as a more playful than that, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I feel like I'm being somewhat type A about it, which will probably backfire at some point. Because it's interesting in like the View Connection course. Like we've been rating each other out of 10 on our performance on the little exercises we do. And like View, you just do it and you just enjoy it. And like,
Mm.
out of those two options, I would bet on just play with it and enjoy it. But there's definitely a part of my brain that gets very excited about numbers going up. Um, and I'm curious, um, how much, so there's attunement and there's attunement to yourself and there's attunement to others.
Yeah.
Like one one theory I have is that just attunement to others is 100% attunement to yourself. And
Hmm.
like, there's actually no point in doing attunement boot camp except insofar as it serves your attunement to yourself.
Hmm.
So I wonder how you think about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's like they're like mirror images of each other, and one ultimately like attunement to yourself is the bottleneck to
Hmm.
attunement for others. Um, and actually this is actually something I've been playing with since we started Attunement Bootcamp, which is one way it's been showing up is like I'll wake up, and before like I would wake up and I would have this like outward focus. So I would like think
Hmm.
about my day or think about like going on my phone or kind of, and now I literally like it's almost like turning the camera
Hmm.
right around at myself and be like, hello, like what's happening here? Like how are you feeling? Kind of almost like being sounds weird, but almost like being a lover to yourself, being like,
Mm.
what is it that you're feeling right now? What do you need? What is going on? And actually, I've noticed just laying there and just have sensations running through my body, just that alone has, it feels like just that practice alone has been increasing my attunement for myself.
Mm.
And it actually makes a lot of sense. It's like, how can I expect someone to be attuned to me if I don't attune to myself? And equally, I understand that desire to want that when you don't, when you're unable to do that for yourself, to want that from the outside. I
Mhm.
think both are valid.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Just makes me think of like how much more attuned, if you were perfectly attuned to me and I was perfectly attuned to me, my attunement would be like 1,000 times plus as deep, just by like the bandwidth limitations of communication
mm,
and even like
yeah.
all your micro expressions. Like I am in my brain and my body, like I to some extent I can feel all of me. And like how
Mhm.
much of me could you ever feel? Like nothing close to what I could ever feel. Um,
Yes, yes.
yeah.
And I would say there's another side of it, which is if I say as a coach, if I'm if I'm more attuned to myself, more than you are attuned to yourself, I might be able to be attuned in a way that I can shine light on some shadows or some things in your unconscious that you're not aware of. This is
Yeah.
kind of what I think Joe does. And what makes him brilliant is like he sees the thing that is still in your unconscious and you're not yourself able to see because he's so attuned. I mean, that's my working theory is that like he's so attuned to himself and has seen everything, kind of like turned every, or what's it called? Like looked under every rock. Is that a saying? What's the saying? Anyways, um, that he's then able to see that in others. So I think both are true, basically.
Mm. Yeah. And that makes me think of people who seem to be psychic.
Mm,
I've worked with a guru who claims to be psychic. Um,
interesting.
I don't think this is true, but moments I have where I'm more psychic than normal do feel like attunement to myself, which is like I'm looking at
Mm,
you, you're emotionally processing something. I'm like, oh, there's like something weird in my belly button area. Like, what? And like, oh, I'm just really confused. And then I'm like, oh, how confused are you? And you're like,
mm,
I'm so confused. But like, wait, I didn't realize I was confused. Um, like that's kind of when I have attunement to a depth that surprises me, it comes
mm,
from like some subtle little thing in my body or just like an image comes to mind. Um, and it just like pops up.
mm. Yeah, do you have any ideas like how that works or like what's happening there?
Yeah. Mm, I mean, you can say mirror neurons, like does that mean anything?
Mm,
But
mm.
really, it's just yeah. And for me, that question is also like, how do you break down attunement? And it's like Jesus, like,
Yeah,
but
it's
like
true.
what can, it feels like I can only over intellectualize it, which is like, oh, I'm picking up. Well, I mean, that has some value. Like, I'm picking up the whole of all your tiny body movements and facial expressions and
Mm,
the way especially the way your voice sounds, but everything. And if I analyze that consciously, I lose 99% of the information. But if I allow an image to come to mind or I allow a feeling to come to mind, that can actually that can actually come from just a way larger portion of my information processing. Um,
mm,
and like, I mean, in the same way that an image or a diagram can convey so much more information so much more quickly than
Yeah.
like a paragraph. Just like an image coming to my mind, or a metaphor or a feeling can convey so much more than whatever words come to mind. And that's another thing, like when we do the Attunement Bootcamp exercises together, and on the question of should we rate them 1 to 10 or what does that serve or not serve, um, I notice I have a part of me that really enjoys analyzing other people. Like, oh,
Mm.
whoa, what's going on? Like, are you confused? Are you sad? But that's like so paragraph, that's so word-based, that's so intellectual. That's like, oh, like that's interesting and fun in a way, but it's also cutting off probably like 90% of my processing.
Mm.
And so how can I strive for attunement? Um, can you strive for attunement? Yeah. But I want to say one other thing too on like attunement to yourself, which is Joe Hudson and Art of Accomplishment just released this new coaching session, and the core question of it is just like, how can you listen to yourself 10% more right now? And we're gonna do this with the people listening. Bang. Um, you just sit here and you listen to me go, how can you listen to yourself 10% more right now? And then you just see what happens in this moment.
I'm just like, as soon as you say that, it's like the excitement just bubbling, like
Mm.
ready to get out of my body. I was literally skipping the other day. I was like turning around, like making sure nobody could see because I was like, I, I was actually like playing around with attunement. I was like, oh my God, this excitement is too much. I can't handle it. And then I was like, kind of asking the excitement like how what it wants to do or how it wants to express itself, and it was like I want to skip, and I was like running kind of, yeah, it was definitely had some feelings of self-consciousness and yeah.
Hell yeah. I love it. I was very
Yeah,
sick
it's such a
yesterday.
fruitful question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
For me it's like, ah shit. I feel kind of bad and vulnerable because it's kind of the opposite. For me, it's like, ah shit, I'm kind of tired. Um,
Mm.
but it's like, can I not avoid that? Um, also I invite your excitement even in my tiredness. Um, but I also wanted to say that because the other thing he says in that podcast that I really like is the more you listen to yourself, the more other people will listen to you.
Mm.
And there's lots of fun things there. But like I just had a very, after I listened to that coaching session, I went to a party later that day. And I'm like normally pretty socially anxious and don't talk a lot, and especially don't talk to new people. And I was just like, had 50% of my attention on listening to myself.
Mm.
And I was like, what the fuck? I'm saying things and I don't know what I'm gonna say next. But like people are listening to me, and like I started talking to strangers like semi-consciously, and like I'm actually enjoying it instead of like feeling
Wow.
performing what's happening. And another thing I like there is like, oh, are you listening to yourself about what you even want to do? Like, are you listening to yourself about do you even want to go to the party? Are you listening to yourself
Mm.
like, do you even want to be sitting where you're sitting? Um, and it's like, when you listen to yourself at all those layers, it's like, oh, I'm here because I want to be here, and I'm talking to you because I want to be talking to you.
Yeah.
Um, and otherwise, I wouldn't be, um, which is also true for this conversation. And also, just an interesting thing, I really love um, emotional things that affect embodiment, that like affect the way I stand and move, and
Mm.
sound, and like listening to myself has actually made most of my vocal fry go away, which I
Mm.
like,
Interesting.
I think is so cool. Um, yeah.
Wow, I never thought about that. I'm gonna try that. I love that. And I love that you were when you were saying that you were able to talk to people and kind of had more social confidence. Are you're frozen?
Am I back?
Harry's gone.
Come on. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here. I'm here.
I know you were tired, but I didn't know you were this tired.
I assert that I'm here.
Okay, I think you're back.
I heard everything you said.
Great. I half believe that you're here. It's kind of okay, great.
Cool. Am I back?
Kind of. It's
Kind of.
like the shadow of Harry.
Okay, you're gonna make the call when you're ready if I'm gonna try to switch my Wi-Fi.
Okay, I think it's good now.
Cool.
Yeah, hopefully
Hmm.
it will continue to be good.
So on kind of the same question, huh? Like when we do the exercises, which is kind of specifically like how much am I attuning to you or how much are you attuning to me? How much is one attuning to other? Do you, how much do you also see that as practicing attunement to yourself at the same time?
Oh yeah, because I'm waiting to see if you're gonna catch the thing that is coming up. So I'm paying more attention to the thing that's coming up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, interesting.
So I'm like kind of paying a lot of attention to my moment to moment experience. And then anytime there's a shift, let's say grief comes up or something else comes up, I'm like paying extra attention because I'm waiting to see if you're gonna pick up on it or not. Whereas in normal coaching or normal if we're doing that outside of Attunement Bootcamp, I feel I'm less paying attention to that level.
Hmm.
What about you?
That makes me think, um, if I have to break down attunement to other, there's attunement to self, and then there's am I going to be vulnerable enough to send out the signal of my attunement to you? Right? Like let's
Mm,
let's say you're sad and you're avoiding it, and I see that you're sad and that you're avoiding it. Am I going to be like, hey, like, are you all right? Or like, hey, do you need support? And at least for me, there's
mm,
something vulnerable about that, which is like, you might not want to feel your sadness and you might get annoyed at me. Um,
yeah.
and that's something I'm realizing I value about the exercises we're doing because a lot of like most of the time in a 3-minute exercise, I hold at least one thing back that came
Mm,
up for me, but I'm basically afraid of being wrong, which I think is being afraid of offending you, uh,
mm,
which is, and what's being afraid of offending you. Uh, yeah, I guess like being afraid of being incompetent. Um,
mm. Makes sense.
and
Mm,
yeah, so I see that as a valuable part of like, because part of me is like, oh, is the whole thing attunement to self? And it's like, attunement to self plus are you vulnerable? Are you gonna be vulnerable enough to share what's coming up for you? Um,
yeah.
when what's coming up for you is largely what's coming up for the other person, especially.
Yeah. It's like, is it safe enough to reveal the thing that the other person is not ready to face yet?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
This is where, sorry, this is where unconditional love comes in, but we'll get into it later. But okay,
hmm,
just putting a pin in it.
I'm how does unconditional love come in there?
It's like the more you're loving your side of it, so it's like you're scared of like let's say being incompetent. So you're the more you love your own incompetence, the more you're able to then do that with
Mm,
me.
mm. So that's also an interesting question. How much is unconditionally loving other people the same as unconditionally loving yourself? And maybe I've just frozen again, sadly.
Hang on, I lost you again. So wait. I didn't hear any of that. I'm gonna make the call to switch to
Dang,
the Wi-Fi.
we're
You're
doing
on
it.
our data, right? Because I
Yeah,
didn't hear that question.
I'm switching now.
Paired with silence. You're
I'm
back.
Okay, the question was, and you can hear me?
Yes.
The question was, and it's also your responsibility to make another call to try another Wi-Fi network if this one doesn't work.
Cool.
Cool. Um, the question was then how much is unconditional love also just unconditional love for yourself?
100%. That's what it is. It's basically like what makes you a good coach is it's like how many ways in how many like angles and nooks and crannies have you managed to beam unconditional love at yourself? Because the thing that what's really transformative is like when you, let's say I'm the coach and you're the client, the thing that you bring out, if I've loved it in myself, I can love it in you. And that's where healing happens, is when the thing that has been shunned gets responded to by love. So I personally think, and it's funny, I didn't used to even believe in unconditional love, but at the moment I feel like that is that can create a bottleneck, or that's the ceiling on someone's coaching. The ceiling is around how much unconditional love they have for themselves.
Yeah, interesting. It makes me think about, in the example, someone's sad, am I gonna ask them about their sadness, even if it's to support them? And it's like there's an internal fear of like, how much am I judging them versus how much am I loving them? And so, right, like a lot of times if someone's angry, like I don't love all of my anger, but I'm pretty excited about anger and I love a bunch of it. Um, and I feel like I've mm, much less shame around it. Um, Probably less shame than other people. And so when I see people are angry, I'm like, oh, how angry are you? And if they're like, oh, not at all, I'm like, okay. Um, but if someone was like overwhelmed or yeah, like feeling incompetent, I was like, oh, how incompetent are you feeling? And they were like, no. I'd be like, oh, I just like I,
Mm,
I put something bad on you. Um,
got it.
and you know, like they'll feel that projection. Um, so that's interesting. It also makes me think of like in my coaching sessions, there's only been a few times where things feel like they've fallen apart a little bit.
Mm,
Basically, when I judge something and project that judgment. So, like, for example, like really early on, like month 1 or 2, and I was doing more internal family system stuff. Um, there was a session where like I felt like we didn't make enough progress
mm,
and I was afraid. I wasn't super conscious of that. I was afraid they felt that way. Uh,
mhm.
but I was like actually subconsciously judging that outcome. And I kind of like, I don't remember exactly, but I kind of like, I wanted them to feel like how much progress they made in like a very naive or surface level sense wasn't like the most important thing.
Mm,
Really, I was trying to like get rid of my own feeling of incompetence. Um, and that led to like us actually both hitting this like awkward thunk That was like,
Mm,
oh, like maybe this wasn't like maybe this was a bad session basically. Uh,
mm,
and like with full love, like even if it was a bad session in all of those ways, for real, with full love, it's like, oh, wait, we can still look at that with love. And like, what do we want to do given that we didn't make that much progress? And like, how does that feel? And like, what does progress mean to you? What are you actually looking for?
mm.
Like, how can I support you better? Um, even just like, oh, like, right, like that didn't feel great to me. Like, how can I support you better? Um, which like
Yeah.
at that time is like would like 0% chance I was gonna ask that question
Mm.
because there's too much judgment and shame around it. Um, yeah.
So these days you're able to ask that?
I'm able to ask that to my friends. Would I ask that? Um, I would love to ask that in a coaching call. I don't think I've asked that in a coaching call before.
Mm.
Um, that feels there's a meaningful sense. It's not responsibility, but there's something about the structure that's like, well, the whole question is how I can support you better.
Mm.
Um, so I think I'd want to ask something more specific than that,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure. I would love for that question to feel right at some point.
Yeah.
Very vulnerable.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about is like having outside of the call, like having a separate call where you have a view conversation about if something came up or if you feel like I think this is more likely to happen with like longer term clients where if there's some kind of thing in the air that is not specific to the contents of the session, but is like a meta thing that's arising between the connection of the coach and the client, like having a view conversation about that where we can address that. That's something that I've been thinking about. In some ways, maybe I haven't had the courage to go there yet because I don't know how it would be received. But that's in like where I want to be in my practice. I want to be able to do that so that there's never anything that can be unsaid.
Yeah, yeah. So feel free to steal this. Something I do already that I really like is um, I set up sessions in sets of four, and
Mm,
not always, but usually. And then after the fourth, at the end of the fourth call, we do like a 15-minute reflection together that's close to what you just said.
mm,
I realized that I do basically ask like, how are things going? Like, how can I better support you? Um, and like, is there anything you want to change? Also, like, no obligation to continue. Like, how much do you want to continue working together or not?
mm,
And just like acknowledging that that space is going to exist
yeah.
and that person, both of us being able to know that for the first four sessions, I think already does a lot of work itself. And then like there's some nice meta changes to the structure we can make that
Mm,
I think are pretty vulnerable to ask for outside of that context. They kind of might feel like they're breaking the container or like someone might feel like they're criticizing my leadership. Um, and I'm also realizing now I'd like to be more vulnerable of like if I have any requests from
mm,
my clients basically.
got
Um,
it.
and I think that would allow them to be more vulnerable to make requests of me as well. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, I like that model. Yeah, I did experiment with something similar and then didn't. I think my experimentation wasn't like there were too many variables or something. I didn't like tighten it down enough, so I kind of abandoned it. But I think it would be helpful to do something like that. So you said you do 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be like a full hour or something.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Thanks. Um, I'm interested in this like in the unconditional love, self versus other. And I wonder if it has the same dynamic as attunement. That's like, how are you willing to be vulnerable enough to show your love for the other person? Like, if you love your own anger, are you willing to be vulnerable enough to like show this person that you love their anger too?
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
Like that can be kind of intense. That can be really intense. Um, but that doesn't resonate for me as much as attunement. So I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. I'm just thinking there's so many like directions we could go. Um, uh, okay, maybe is it helpful if I give a little bit of background on like why I think like why unconditional love in the first place?
I'm interested.
Okay. Um, because before, yeah, like I said earlier, I didn't used to believe in unconditional love. And in fact, when people used to say, oh, like parents are supposed to love their kids unconditionally, I
Hmm.
was like, oh, humans are not capable of unconditional love. Like that's not, you can't expect that of a person. Like that's too much to ask.
Until when did you think that?
I thought that until I had this experience where I basically this was kind of like an altered state of consciousness experience where basically I tapped into like this deep source of unconditional love in my core. And and in that moment I was just like, oh, okay, I'm convinced because I felt I received it, you know, I was like on the receiving end of it for
Uh,
what felt like maybe the first time in my life, like true unconditional love, where it really felt like I had no doubt in my mind that there was nothing I could do, like the worst crime or something, the love would not budge.
hmm.
And importantly enough, there was nothing good I could do that would budge the unconditional love. Because I think that's also, you know, I think they call it like punishment by praise or something, like when you kind of like I guess parents do this particularly where they by praising your child you're altering their behavior because you're like reinforcing the things they should be doing and not the things that they shouldn't be or the things that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
And that is also the form of conditional love in my opinion. So this unconditional love that I experienced, like there was nothing good I could do. You know, I could be the biggest saint and it would still love me the same. Like it wouldn't
Yeah, yeah,
increase.
yeah.
Um, and when I felt this, and I think we talked about Adyashanti briefly before, like the Dharma teacher, like he calls this redemptive love because it really feels like when you're faced with this kind of love, your all of your mistakes and your flaws are um this this love just doesn't care about that basically. It's just irrelevant. Um, and so yeah, when I had that experience, I became convinced that unconditional love does exist. And then over the years, it kind of just like, um, you know, thinking about self-love and all these things, um, I just realized that it is possible to love yourself unconditionally, and it is possible to love other people unconditionally. It's not full, like I think, it will take a lifetime to be able to love unconditionally fully. I think there's always things that, but everything that you can't love unconditionally is like an opportunity to then love unconditionally. So, um, I think your question was something around like how much of it is about your relationship to yourself, right? Is that
Yeah,
remind me like
relationship to
what?
self, like loving yourself versus loving others, and how do those relate?
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I think it's when you love it in yourself that you can then love it in somebody else. Like either you love it by default because you weren't conditioned to not love it. And so you just love like certain things. Like, you know, there are things that you're just like, yeah, that's fine. And then maybe somebody else is like, oh no, that's really bad. Like anger, for example. So either you loved it from the beginning or you were conditioned not to love it, and then you have to learn to love it. But there's another insight I had, a really visceral insight that also kind of fed into this, which is like,
I I actually know this is interesting. I
oh,
was gonna say, can I interrupt you? But now I'm really interested.
yeah, please
I,
do. Oh, okay. Okay,
I
I'll
want to
say
ask something after this. Yeah.
okay, okay. yeah, the other thing is that, and I feel a bit vulnerable saying this because I feel like it could be taken the wrong way, but I had this visceral, like embodied understanding that I, and this is everyone, I think it's not just, I'm not saying that this is me, but it's like I contain the totality of all of human, like, um, different, like, human behaviors. So within me, I have the capacity for the worst crime, and I also have the capacity to be a saint. Sounds so weird to say out loud, but it's not necessarily that I am going to do those things, but it's that I contain the capacity or the potential for it. And
Yeah.
so that means that um, when I see somebody that does something that I think I wouldn't do, uh, by recognizing that I have that capacity
Mm.
too, I get to be able to love it both within myself
Mm.
and the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was your
It,
question?
that just makes me think like, if I was talking to Joe Hudson, I was like, Joe Hudson, like, and this is true, like, sometimes I imagine killing people. You'd be like, me too.
Yeah,
You'd be like,
exactly.
what's the problem? I'd be like, what? I'm like, that makes me bad and evil and wrong. He's like, oh, why? Like what makes that bad? And I'm like, oh, that what? Yeah. It's like it'd be like, oh, like sounds like you want to move some anger, and sounds like that might be a helpful way for you to move anger. Also sounds like you're not
Yeah.
hurting anyone by doing it, and that it's helping you move your anger. And be like, can you just play into my story that I'm bad? That would be a lot more comfortable for me. Yeah.
Exactly.
um, oh,
It's
I
like
don't
from
know.
this perspective, sorry, can I add?
I
It's
go.
from this perspective, you are already bad, so you might as well own it. And you are already good, so you might as well
Mm,
own it. That's
yeah,
kind of what I was talking about. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Not you, just anyone. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Mm. Just makes me think about like integrating the shadow, integrating the dark side of yourself. Um, like what's integrated jealousy look like, or like, yeah,
Mm.
I mean, for a lot of people, I'm super behind anger these days, but what's integrated anger look like? And like, oh, it's super passionate and loving, and like
Mhm.
I would say creates direction and clarity and structure. That's like,
Mhm.
oh wow, there's like I can see how those are two sides of the same coin. And like the owned version is a lot less dangerous.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. That's really, I love that sentence.
Mm.
Mm. And another cheesy line that, again, this is all like visceral understanding rather than like conceptual. I think it can sound cringe when it feels conceptual, but I would say that there is like behind everything there's love, basically, like even hatred, like it comes. I'm just cringing at myself saying it, but I really believe it. Like even behind, like hatred is influenced by, or it's what's called motivated by love, because it's
Mm.
like something in you is like keep away from, let's say if it's hatred against a person, it's like keep away from this person because something in you believes that this person is not safe.
Mm.
And so that's love. That's like something in you wants you to be safe. And yes, maybe it's like misinformed. That's why it's maybe it's more extreme than it needs to be, but it's ultimately coming from love. So cheesy conclusion.
Yeah, now I see that. Um, and what do you see as the mechanistic benefit of loving parts of yourself? What actually happens when you love yourself that makes things work better for a person?
Interesting. The first thing that came up is like things flow better.
Hmm.
Because when you don't love it, you resist it.
Hmm.
And so you just constantly are like up against these obstacles and things don't flow. Your joy doesn't come out, your aliveness doesn't come out. And then you have like grievances or issues with people or yeah, it blocks flow, I would say,
Yeah.
when you don't love it.
Yeah, that I really like this image that Nick Camarata gave me, which is like um, doing jhana meditation as is your whole system. And like I don't like thinking of us as mechanisms or machines, but imagine you're a machine and there's all these gears and pulleys and wires and it's all interconnected and there's just a bunch of gunk in it. There's just like a bunch of mud and sticks and branches in it. And when you love stuff, you're just like removing the top layer of that gunk everywhere and like things seem to
Exactly.
move more cleanly. Um, there's also a fun thing that's not for now. That's not for now. But and another way to see that more literally is just the relationship between constriction in the body and emotional work. I love people's lack of constriction in their face when they're like they've done a ton of emotional work. They're like 55
Mm.
and they like don't have wrinkles in their face. It's like what? Um, and so I just love seeing the lack of constriction in people's bodies. And it's like, oh, there's because you say resistance, and I can imagine that seeming abstract to people when they haven't experienced literal muscle constriction in their body releasing from processing emotions.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I'm literally not tensing my neck anymore because
Yes.
I'm less afraid of people criticizing me because I processed my fear of people criticizing me as a child. And now I literally have more energy because I'm literally spending less calories unnecessarily tensing my neck,
Mm.
bracing for criticism all of the time because I don't want to feel that set of sensations in my neck of like fear and sadness and insecurity. Um,
Mm.
yeah. And so from that view, I guess love is the thing that allows the constriction to release. Love is the thing under the constriction. I'm not sure, but yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, love undoes the constriction.
yeah,
Love that.
weird, very weird.
Yeah, I really enjoyed hearing you describe that.
Mm. And and that's the other weird thing that I think would make what we're talking about hard to connect with for my past self, which is it's like, okay, you undo constriction and then what? And it's like, dude, you're an animal. Like you are a human animal. You're an ape, you're a mammal. And so it's like, imagine you have a dog that's like traumatized, you know, it got bit by a wolf when I was young, and now it's traumatized and like shakes all the time. And it's like wasting a bunch of energy being scared. Like, what happens to that dog when you like when it releases the constriction in the body and feels safe? It's like more of a dog.
Yeah.
It's just like more friendly and happy and plays more. And it's like what happens to a human? What happens to a Harry when it releases constriction? Like it's just more of a Harry, but it's like also really scary how much less control and ego there is, which is like I'm more naturally and effortlessly my full self. And like I have fewer I I get to but also have to make fewer decisions and like follow my intuition more. Um, also reminds me of me saying the listening to myself thing at this party. And you said, "Oh, it's nice to hear you felt more socially confident." And it's just like, oh no, it's just I wasn't self-conscious and things were
Mm.
just happening, which also sounds cliche. But it's like it's so weird. It's so weird. Um, it's so weird because in general, people are quite, but at least my past self so identified with making myself a certain way. But like
Mm,
with effort, it's like no, I did this. I
yeah.
did this. And like the more you release constriction, it's just like things are just happening.
It's like, you know what that reminds me? It's like, so we've never met in person, right? So, and we've been talking for months. And there was one time where you came on a call and I don't know what shift had happened or what had happened. And suddenly I realized that you're a tall man. Like I hadn't
Hmm.
realized that because your
Oh
neck
man.
was not showing before. Like it wasn't, and I realized your height from your neck because I could see the totality of your neck, whereas before it was like you were kind of hunching down, so I couldn't see much of your neck. Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of reminds me of that.
And that's especially interesting because um I consciously experience myself as still, I mean, especially that's something I've been noticing change. Especially 3 months ago, I consciously experienced myself as shorter than I am. And I would
Mm,
say like less of a man than I am. Like sometimes I see myself in a mirror and I don't realize that it's me. I'm like, oh, that's like a tall 185-pound man. Uh,
mm,
and I'm like, what the fuck, that's me. And like when I look at people as tall as me and who weigh as much as me, I'm like, you're so tall. And like also
wow.
when I play basketball, I like don't ram my body into people to like move them out of the way because I don't realize in an embodied sense how much I weigh. And then people are always
Mm,
like, "Oh, how much do you weigh?" I'm like, "Oh, 185." And they're like, "Oh." And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, whoa, like I'm literally the biggest person on the court right now." And like I'm not using that at all because like in some sense I'm not aware of it. And when I have like spiritual experiences when I have extra energy from releasing emotional constriction, whether that's
mm.
like meditation or a really cathartic conversation or drugs. Often I will look at myself in the mirror and be like, my legs are so long. Oh my God. Oh my God. And I'll even be like, oh my God, my legs are so heavy. Oh,
Mm.
I didn't, what the hell? Like, what the
I
hell?
really want to see what's 185 in kgs,
Oh,
but I can kind of imagine.
the 225 is 100 kg. Um, so that means
Okay.
185 is minus 20 kg. So that means I'm like 80 kilograms. I
Okay.
think.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I just love how this stuff connects with embodiment.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's my favorite thing.
Yeah, same. It's like I don't know if you saw my tweet, but it's like the way I know I've integrated in something is when I burp
Mm.
without fail every time.
Haha.
It's like that's how I know that it's worked.
That's interesting. Is that like I have like a sternum bubbling sometimes. Is that the feeling you're talking?
Mm. Oh, you can burp on demand?
Well, I just not really. I don't know. I just thought about the sternum bubbling thing and it happened. I
Okay.
was kind of trying a little bit.
Okay. Mine is like a literal burp that starts from
Interesting.
like the bottom of my belly, work its way up, and I literally sometimes it gets like it's in my what's this called, like the chest, upper chest area,
Yeah.
the windpipe. No, anyway,
Well, this is sternum, whatever.
yeah, but I meant the what is the tube that I forgot the name of the tube, but
The
anyway,
esophagus maybe.
yeah, it sometimes gets stuck there, and then there's like more emotion that needs to move, and then it moves, and then it's like it comes out. And then I'm like, okay, settled. It's
Oh,
in. It's in the bag.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's one thing I like about, oh, I guess
But also it's all empty. It's just
Ah, yeah, no, I'm definitely identified with it at this point. Like it's really nice to feel my body, to feel like constriction moving or like what's that? I don't know what to call that. But when
buzzing. Oh,
something's something's tight and it's constricting and releasing over and over again.
like a
Um,
spasm.
yeah, spasm. It's really nice to feel my muscles spasm as signs of like releasing constriction. Feeling how
Mm.
it moves. I'm like, yes, something's happening. And I'm
Oh,
like,
cool.
yeah. Oh,
I haven't paid attention to that.
oh, what? Wait, wait,
I don't think I get that. I get the burping thing
whoa,
instead.
that's actually kind of interesting to me. This so I meditate lying down. So if I
Hmm.
do emotional inquiry, which
Yeah.
art of accomplishment meditation that people can get for free if you want it. I really like it. Or if I'm doing tranquil wisdom insight meditation, which is
Mm.
for people
TMI.
listening. Yeah.
No,
For
sorry, twim.
yeah. For people listening, um, that's a meditation where you like literally the two of the important steps are like release, like physically release, also mentally, but physically release and physically relax. And when I do both of those things lying down, most of the time there's some part of my body, there's some muscle that is like microspasming. Um,
Mm.
and sometimes it's also like a feeling of some sensation moving in my body around or
Mm.
changing a little bit, but also often it's like micro muscle spasming. And that's like how I know, kind of like you're saying,
Mm.
that's how you know it's legit. That's how
Yeah,
I know it's legit.
got it.
And I'm like, or like my face will be like, oh,
I've seen that. Okay.
yeah. Um, it's real when people are really vulnerable, their faces go crazy. Like their faces have so many micro twitches. Um,
Interesting.
there's one, in my opinion, there's in one view conversation with my friend, we were doing the vulnerability exercise and he's like about to say something and his face just micro twitched for like 20 seconds. And I was like, in my head, I was like, wow, if he says this to me, this is the most vulnerable thing anyone's ever said to me. Just like,
Oh,
just like, wow. Just like his body is just freaking out. And like all of the layers to go through to reveal that. Um, yeah.
and did he tell you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was
Oh,
awesome.
I see.
Um, there's a whole
Incredible.
there's a whole fantastic thing. Like we took an action together. I'll just say we right after that conversation, we like did something together in relation to the vulnerability
Mm.
and in support of him like facing it. And it's really beautiful. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that's kind of sometimes I wish we did this work in person so that
Sure.
there's a lot of micro things that are probably easier to notice in person.
Yeah. Yeah. I've done very little work in person. I've never had a therapist in person until like 4 months ago. And
Mm.
I hadn't done view in person until like 4 months ago. And I hadn't done a coaching session in person until like a month ago or 2 months ago, and maybe three. It's just like, oh, it's so much easier to be vulnerable.
Mm.
I mean, mostly that, which is massive. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it's somehow more powerful, and I don't know exactly why. Maybe it is the vulnerability piece that you mentioned. Uh, yeah, I was lucky enough to start when I started out. I did it in person,
mm,
and so that was really good because I think there's like more data that you
yeah,
can process while you're or like pick up on when you're doing things in person. So it was really good for learning.
yeah. I mean, you can't see 60% of me right now. And
Mm,
obviously there's a lot more information coming through my face than the other 60% of me, but
mm,
um, Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So we covered attunement, we covered unconditional love. What else? I had a tab open in my head from earlier, but I don't remember what.
I'd be excited to just run an attunement boot camp exercise. Um, yeah.
Great.